Alec. I'm out of Hindley, Nebraska. It's a small town, south central Nebraska, about in the middle of the state on the Kansas border. And I come out here wheeling. This is, I don't know how many years in a row, a lot, 12 or 13 years. I spend the winters in Arizona and California wheeling in the wintertime and farming and cleaning grain in the summer. First of all, the basics of the car, the chassis, just a custom built frame. It's all 4130 sheet metal that I sheared and welded together to make the frame. Spider tracks front and rear. Mega 9 differential. The motor's a 1.9 VW diesel that's had, it's called stage 3 tuning and bigger injectors. So instead of 90 horse, it's about 160. The diesel's excellent power. I was really surprised. I mated it to a 700 R4 with, I built a custom built adapter. Works really, really well. Good power, and the gear ratios are just right on that 700R, which gives me some, it works great on the highway too. It runs 60 mile an hour. The frame will extend from 100 inches to 136 inches. Got a foot of travel at each corner for weight transfer, and mainly when you're at 136 inches, your belly clearance goes very low, so it lets me raise the chassis up to clear over obstacles. The frame slides on just UHMW plastic. I've run 3 cars this way now and just haven't had any issue with the plastic, so you can't beat it. If it works, you'll fix it. And so instead of trying to go to some exotic roller system, I just stayed with the plastic. And I did have some issues breaking transmissions last winter. The tail cone housing on a 700R, if anybody's run enough long enough, they broke one. This is cool. I don't know if you can see it in there. The 700R is finned, 4 fins on it, 3/4 inch plate welded to the rear, which is welded to the bottom of the pan. And then I line bored the case, because you shrink the case when you weld on them. But 2 days of line boring with sandpaper, I was able to get the guts back in the transmission, and it works well. So all the torque is handled by the motor mounts, nothing on the one mount on the bottom of the transfer case. It's just Atlas 2 3.8. I don't want to be any lower, and I have to, because I can feel the torque load. And if you get to a 4 or 5 to 1, then it's hard to feel that torque load. And when you have a lot of torque, you can bust things really easy. This way I can watch my boost pressure on the turbo, and I know about where things are going to start braking, so I know when to get off the power. Which doesn't mean I still don't break something once in a while, but not very often. It works pretty good. It's all prototype. It's all farm equipment. It's a Prince valve for it was actually off of a backhoe. It's a 6-spool valve for frame extension, and 4 one for each corner. Same way with it's just an orbit, standard orbit valve for steering. You're running a large Prince pump. I got 6 gallon a minute at 2,000 PSI at idle. It's custom 3-belt drive check. I've never seen one, never heard of one. The front is it's actually the small. It's a 1 5/8" 10 spline. The rear is a semi 2.5 inch 10 spline, and I've custom machined the center section out of a 24 inch piece of 4140. And outside's 10 spline, inside 10 spline, 1 5/8", and it just telescopes together. And it's remarkably well. I haven't had any issues. I mean, I scuff it up because it's long. It gets in the way, but it's been strong enough. It has held up. 3 years of off-roading, I've got over 800 hours on it. Weight-wise, I'm at 3,480, 3,500 pounds, which isn't bad for all the hydraulics and stuff I've got on it. I wheel with me and my girlfriend were right at 4,000 pounds when we wheel on fuel and air compressor. I travel with a few parts, not as many as I used to, but it's hard to get a toolbox less than 100 pounds. If you've got anything at all, though. I could actually have 38 inches of travel, but without custom building the cylinder, I couldn't do it. And it's nice if you bend or hit a rock or something to be able to just get it off the shelf. In most places that handle dump trucks and stuff that handle hydraulics, they've got them in stock. So it makes it easy to replace the parts. I wheel with Kevin Carroll, which is from Moab here, and we're doing Black Flag tomorrow. And I just happened to hook up with these guys that do the hard stuff, and I really fell in love with hardcore rock crawling, and so I didn't do it with any competition in mind. I don't have a competitive bone in my body. I just want to beat my friends. I built a car called Rock Spider, which would go 5 to 14 feet wide and was hydrostatic driven. Go anywhere, but it's like watching paint dry. So, and I've come back to the conventional one, and now I'm old enough. I like the comfort of the coil shocks, and it just rides nice. I can ride it all day, and I don't get beat up. And if you're on the simple, like Pritchard Easy Trails, then it's so much fun to drive because it's so easy to drive with the rear steer once you learn all this stuff. And your timing is what you lose. It's like doing anything. If you could be really good at it, and if you don't do it every day, your sense of timing isn't quite as sharp, and that concerns me a little tomorrow on Black Flag. It's such a hardcore. We did it last year, but I was at the end of my season where I'd been wheeling every day, so I was really sharp and on my A game, and now I'm not on the A game. I'm 2 months out of since I wheeled last time. So, I don't even run cooler on the hydraulics. It holds 2 gallon. I'm running a flow divider that splits that. It's 6 gallon at idle, but it'll pump 20 gallon wound up. So I just run a flow divider, so I pump a no pressure. It just diverts it, circulates it in the tank, and I'm not even running any other than the tank and the lines. That's the only cooling, and it's just not an issue. It was all about, because when you're out somewhere, if you got a totally custom rig, if you can't go to a machine shop and go to the hardware store and buy the parts, where I spend so much time away from home, it was important for me to have when I did the starter on this and the flywheel, I made the adapter. It uses a stock Chevy starter, a stock Chevy from the motor back. It's all GM, so I can go to any Pep Boys and get a starter, a flywheel. Go to any transmission shop. Nothing's custom built other than my fins that I've welded onto this one, but the transmission itself is all off the shelf. There's nothing exotic, and Atlas, of course, you can one phone call to them and whatever you need the next day you got. So, and I've never had to call them. That's the nice thing about them. You don't normally have to do any issues. The Mega 9s I broke the ring and pinion, and the guy, the next day they had one. Look at an LS3 motor. Where's your RPM at to get 200 foot-pounds of torque? I'm making a lot of torque on the low end. I've been surprised, and so have my friends, with the LS motors in this tight sand washes coming out. I can hang right with them as long as we don't hit a straightaway, because right where my torque is, and they're kind of out of their element at that idle. And the 700, I don't think you want anything smaller beside, even though it's a little 4-cylinder motor. The torque comes on strong in the car. I wanted to see if I could do it and make it work. And you can see by the frame on this thing, we use this thing. In fact, I did the right line on potato salad the other night and it didn't end so well, but there's nobody else does it. And I was there. So it's amazing. You can fix a lot with some patching and weld. We're going to talk a little bit about the drivability of it, because it's got so many flex points and extensions and that, and the handling. The hydraulic steer on the front and rear eliminate any bump steer as far as the drivability of it on the road. So the biggest factor is when I'm stretching the frame out, driving it down the road, the drive shaft length, there's a sweet spot in there, because it's like a 80-pound drive shaft. There's a lot of weight, a lot of rotating mass going on that's hard to balance clear through the spectrum of being short and long. So it's, if you get out of the sweet spot at higher speeds, you get a vibration like you can imagine. But when you find a sweet spot, which is about at 112 inches, about 12 inches extension, the drive shaft balances out, and it works really well. So you don't have that a real big issue of driving it, but it's something you don't want to mess with when you're going high speed down the highway. Same way with rear steer. Anybody that's drove a rear steer car, you don't want to bump it at higher speed. Going slow, not an issue. Now, before I did the Heims and I had the rubber bushings, it was squirrely at higher speeds because they was a flex, or 8 rubber bushings and then a 1/8 of an inch of movement on each one, so it was pretty squirrely. Now with the Heims, it's much more stable on the highway, and I can raise the frame and lower it, and it affects the travel not a bit. Even though the Heims are moving up and down, the steering doesn't affect the ride stays remarkably the same. The biggest factor is the drive shaft vibration. That as you raise it up, you increase the angle dramatically if you're short. We build these cars, we kind of throw the theory of proper steering out the window. It's will it fit? And I turn 50 degrees of steering. Proper engineering on the steering geometry goes out the window, and once we get it to fit, we take it out and drive them, and so far I've been fairly lucky and that the steering aspect of it stayed really manageable at road speed. You know, you can fudge quite a bit on stuff and make it work, and that's half the fun, is experimenting and trying something that you've never seen before and see if it'll work. Raised in a farm environment, these were like 49 cents worth of steel versus $149 for the steering, and it's adjusting tilt too, as well as removable. So and I had that in the shop. I didn't have to wait a week to order it and get it shipped in. Same way with my tie downs or my limiting straps. I had that in the shop on the shelf. So this is 3 years, 800, 900 hours of use on it, and it works fine that way. So just kind of left it alone. No, it's a total hydraulic steering. However, you can get steering that is steerable under power and not under power, and this one is. I can actually, in Colorado, there's some, if you can steer your hydraulic car without the motor running, it's legal steering. And if you shut the motor off and you have no steering, then it's not illegal steering for a highway. And this thing, even though it turns hard, if I'm moving, I can steer the car and drive it. If my engine quits, I can turn it and drive it off the road, which is kind of nice. And it just depends on the type of orbit valve you buy as to whether or not it circulates the oil in the pump itself or whether it needs to go through the system. And this one will circulate the oil back and forth in just the pump. So that's a nice feature. And if you're doing a car with pure steering, that's what you really want. And you get some feel on the steering. If you hit something with the front wheel, you can feel that load. And if you're the other type, it's called a no-load steering. You don't feel any input on the steering, and I actually get a feel for the input. I can tell if I'm putting a load on, which is important. You can press steel more than you can press oil, so it's really made these cars work. You just can't run a worm gear, and well, I'm not saying you can't. If you have to, if we had to, we could, but it's far better system and just as safe. I feel more likely to break a worm gear steering system. You'd think when you grow up you'd quit playing on a rock, but so far I'm not grown up. I believe how Red Green said, we may not be able to stay young, but we can at least stay immature. And it's pretty good advice.